Welcome to the Plague Hive. I'm once again joined by Tom, who took Uzuri to a second place finish at the recent Battle Hardened Orlando. We're here to talk about his deck and, more importantly, to analyze the match he had in round 5 of the tournament, a game against the Dorinthea running Decimator Greataxe, which is a beautiful example of navigating an opponent that's trying to fatigue you. So if you yourself find that you have some issues with this kind of situation, definitely stick around and watch how Tom decided to do that and decided to navigate that situation. Before we get into the video and the analysis of the matchup, why don't we just quickly go over the deck that you brought. It's very similar to the list that Ben Dodd took to the Calling Melbourne win. So we don't really need to go over the entirety of the deck. Maybe you just run us through the changes that you did and why you decided to go with those changes for the meta that you were facing at the Battle Hardened.
Yeah, for sure. So the main change that happened to the metagame after that calling is Icelander is now Living Legend.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to see an uptick of Kano, the other wizard, but nevertheless, I cut Arcane Barrier from the list. There's not enough Rune Blades, I think, to justify it. And even if there were, maybe a different slot would be used instead of the Arcane Lantern. So in any case, we now get 73 cards to work with in the main deck, which is nice. So you'll see some changes to the kind of situational poppers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
There's Amnesia, Erase Face, and Humble in some number. Erase Face is the only one that I brought at 3 of because I expected lots of Mechanologists.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you sum up all of the 3 Mechanologists that showed up, there were no Teklo.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the most represented class. So feel good about the 3 Erase Face choice.
All right.
And these slots, I think you can kind of tailor to your local meta. Whichever heroes they hit best, you can have the max copies of that effect.
Okay, makes sense. So against Mechanologist, you would run Erase Face. If you're expecting a lot of Ninja, you would run Amnesia if it's Katsu, and probably still Erase Face if it's Fi that you're having issues with. And then Humble goes for basically any hero that's really heavily impacted by Humble, right? So Dromai, for example.
Yeah, so in prior versions of this list, and so too the one that Ben Dodd brought to the calling, we had Down and Dirty in this slot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I kept finding that while Down and Dirty has good utility into Dromai, it's still not really the way I want the matchup to go.
Okay.
So I think honestly it might just be personal preference, but as you say, Humble has other matchups where it's useful, and that's kind of what tipped me over the edge to not playing Down and Dirty.
Mm-hmm.
In the prior meta, the one with Icelander in it, Dromai was such a powerful force that I think it kind of made sense to just devote sideboard slots specifically for her.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do go back and look at the metagame breakdown at the start of the event, there's no one hero that's more than about 10%.
Mm-hmm.
I expected something like that, just a little bit of a wider field.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like you say, Humble still does work against Dromai. It absolutely amazing against Levia, which I think I expected in some number.
True.
And then it has some kind of niche applications past those two. Quite good into Bolton. Basically turns off his whole turn if he planned on charging.
Yeah.
Etc. So
it's great against Dorinthea, for example. Like, if she gets hit with this and she doesn't have a Twinning Blade, she can only attack you once, and that's it. That's her turn. So there's no chance of her getting a counter on that turn. No way to really go wide and punish you, for maybe overblocking the first attack or something like that. So, yeah, I get the whole, personal preference thing. And realistically, I think any popper that you put in a deck past, like, the core 3, right? And that would be Command and Conquer, Shakedown, and Death Touch. I think these are, like, core, and you run 3 of these 3 in any configuration of an Uzuri deck, I think. Except for, like, maybe the very most hardcore fatigue-oriented lists that just go like, okay, Death Touch blocks 2, I don't want none to do with that, right? But I think any other iteration of an Uzuri list will want to run these 9 cards, and then any other popper that you put in a deck to some extent is like personal preference, right?
Yeah, personal preference and meta consideration.
Yeah, exactly,
yep.
Yeah.
So just really quick, a couple of the other differences. I did not bring Blue Shred to this event.
Yep.
There are some overlapping reasons for this. One of them is that Ben and I have been iterating this pretty closely but we've been collaborating a lot on this iteration is what I mean. Like we talk a lot, we, our ideas influence each other. So some ideas I got from him, I actually wanted to try out, and they just kind of like took the place of Blue Shred.
Right. Okay.
And then some other things that I came across in my testing that I wanted to try, such as That All You Got, also replaced them. And before you scream out about Blue Shred being an amazing card, it is. But one of the reasons it was so good is because in the prior meta, it was both a blue and a card that could force an on-hit against Icelander. And then because Bravo was maybe the third pillar of that format, you really wanted these extra ways to push through damage. Those games could be very grindy, get close to fatigue. I've seen in this meta a shift away from the more defensive Bravo. Like they're just trying to kill Dromize, basically. And the hyper defensive dash builds. And so like, I think Brody brought Bravo to this event with maybe 8 D-Reacts in the list total, including some blue unmovable. If Bravos aren't on 10 plus D-Reacts, the blue shreds are like marginal. But we're about to watch a fatigue game where blue shred would have helped a lot. So
I mean, yeah, like that's the issue with Dorinthea, right? Like when you sit across from a Dorinthea, you kind of don't really know what type she's going to be. And I think you're expecting Dawnblade probably. That's like what would be my go-to if I was sitting across a Dorinthea that I didn't know and I didn't do any scouting. I would expect them to flip Dawnblade and then side accordingly. So you run all of these defense reactions, right? And then obviously if they bring Decimator, like D-Reacts are among the worst cards you could run into Decimator. I think we're gonna go over that a little bit more once we get into the game.
Sure.
Yes. Okay, let's just quickly round out this list. So you exchange the blue shreds for, I'm seeing like blue infect here. So, but you did cut one backstab for that. So I think the total number of blue stealth cards is almost the same. Like you're up 1 compared to
you're up 1 from 6. Well, I should define relative to what. So the very first iteration of this deck that we brought to an event was US Nationals back in September.
Yep.
That deck was on 6 blue stealth and 2 looking for a scrap. And at that time, I was taking out looking for a scrap and Nimble Strike into almost any aggro matchup.
Okay.
The reason for this is I had additional stealth cards that could play the role of additional red stealth cards that could play the role of being the aggressor, usually forcing my Lexi opponent to make a blocking decision.
Right.
And so the 6 blue stealth, you could get away with having so few against basically Bravo because those games go long. Sometimes you want to pitch stack reds anyway. Sometimes you like sink below looking for a scrap to the bottom and you're kind of guaranteed. Yeah. So now, through the iterations with Ben, sometimes I play 1 scrap and the Nimble Strike into actually several aggro matchups now. Like the ninjas just aren't fast enough. They're not like Lexi was.
Yeah.
And so having the second looking for a scrap and the 7th stealth card is like, I'm just kind of predicting that the game is going more mid-range in general. So if you do bring in the second scrap, it's like a little bit more likely to be seen. And I think this is all kind of marginal, but the game can be won and lost in the margin. So
absolutely, especially with a deck like Uzuri, right? Like she basically thrives on being as efficient as possible every single turn. That's kind of her whole thing, is to try to squeeze the maximum value out of every single card that you put in. So absolutely, like working on those margins and trying to find the perfect ratios for the deck makes a ton of sense to me. So I can see it, like go up 1 blue stealth, which makes looking for a scrap a little more playable. And you still have to, consciously try to work towards putting a blue stealth in the graveyard as soon as possible, right? And sometimes you have to make slightly suboptimal plays to make that happen. But, it unlocks one of the most powerful cards in the deck, in my opinion, in the form of looking for a scrap. So it's a sacrifice that, makes sense to make in a situation. And then Inertia Trap, which replaced Frailty Trap, I suppose.
Basically.
Yeah.
The way I like to build a deck is, I think the first iteration, actually, the thing it had right was the ratios of things, the number of reaction type cards or defensive type cards. Basically, anything that's not an attack action. So the ratio of that and the pitch ratios, I think, are pretty much spot on, and we've just been kind of fluctuating the rest depending on the meta.
Yeah.
So Inertia Trap is one of those. It turns out its best application is against Bravo. You can pretty reliably kind of eat their Arsenal card after they hammer you. And it has some interesting play patterns into Azalea. I won't say it is a silver bullet for that matchup, because that card is Warmongers. We already know about how good that is into Azalea.
Yeah.
This is just a little more flexible because it's a 3-block into, any random aggro deck if you need it. Like Dash.io, maybe. Like I mentioned, the game plan against Bravo with it is quite good, way better than Warmongers is. So this kind of flexes across a few matchups, and then in Azalea specifically, if Azalea is doing the thing that they really want to do, they will be making Ponder tokens.
Yeah.
So like Dominate and Premeditate, and obviously Codex. So the inertia doesn't get you there. So I think it is sometimes a win more against Azalea, but if you can line up a turn where they don't have Tunic and they have no Arsenal because you either blew it up or you kind of force them off of it by some other means, Inertia Trap can really make sure that you're winning that game.
Yeah, like you said, it has to line up basically with them not having a Ponder, but I think if it does, it's a very, very good way to kind of keep momentum, right? Because Azalea without an Arsenal is a vastly different thing from Azalea with an Arsenal. Like, her whole consistency suffers so much when she doesn't have access to that Arsenal at the start of her turn. So I can definitely see it being a card that can win you some games, and then in other games it'll just not line up with her not having a Ponder. And when she has the Ponder, obviously Inertia Trap is kind of worthless. It doesn't do anything if they know how to, stack the triggers. But I think, like you said, it's really good into Bravo as well, and it definitely would be enough to make the cut for me to run it into Azalea as well, especially because Frailty Trap in this current meta just really doesn't do enough. Like, I think the only deck it really impacts is like Dash.io, and then maybe some versions of OG Dash with the pistol build. But realistically, Frailty Trap is not how you beat a Dash on a pistol build, in my opinion. It helps, right? Like, it can get you across the finish line, but your game plan should not need access to Frailty Trap to beat Pistol Dash, in my opinion.
I agree. There is another notable exception for Inertia Trap that's where it's very strong, and that's against Bolton. So Bolton, first of all, if they're on the Sabres plan, that should be pretty easy for us. They need 5-card hands plus an Arsenal. Yeah. So it's like, we kill Arsenal better than any deck in the game.
True.
Okay, so that being said, they should be playing Raiden. If they're playing Raiden, Inertia Trap is literally always turned on.
True.
So, if you can sniff out that they're trying to Arsenal Illumina, for instance, then this will get them very hard.
That's true, yeah, actually, yeah. I still kind of don't know how relevant Bolton is gonna be. Like, he feels more relevant than I think people give him credit for, in a sense. But then, on the other hand, he just has these, non-games into some decks where he just really doesn't do enough to actually make it across the finish line, basically.
Yeah, so I actually think Bolton is a good example of a hero that's benefited from the Fab 2.0 transition.
100%. Yeah.
Now that Icelander's gone, I think Bolton has a real shot. I think it'll just take some time to figure out where he sits in the metagame, what his best build is.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a new set for warrior cards, so that could change a lot.
Gonna be interested to see, because traditionally Bolton doesn't really benefit a whole lot from most warrior cards, right? He really kind of wants to do his own thing, and historically the majority of the regular untalented warrior cards haven't really been doing a whole lot for Bolton. Like, the only one I can think of right now that's a really strong pick for Bolton is Oath of Steel, specifically for Sabres combo Bolton. That's a really strong one, potentially. And of course the Sabres themselves, right? They're also vanilla warrior cards in a way. But other than that, he doesn't really utilize those cards a whole lot. But we digress. Let's not talk about Bolton too much. definitely going to be interesting to see where all of these heroes land once Heavy Hitters drops, because I think that set is going to shake up the meta a whole bunch. And it's going to be definitely very interesting to see how, that all shakes out and how Uzuri looks in that meta, actually. So, okay. I think that pretty much takes care of the majority of changes that you put in a deck. Like, obviously,
just one more.
Yep.
Yeah, one more I want to shout out is
Sure.
that all you got. It's kind of like against Dash and Ninja, and sometimes the Mirror. This card will line up, and you'll just get a free 2 life or whatever it is.
Yep.
And it's a yellow, so honestly, it was just kind of something I wanted to try out. Okay. I cut it from the list very promptly after this event.
Okay, so it did not do what you needed it to do, or
it just lined up so infrequently that I just don't see it being, until there is a Dash IO deck that's 20% of the meta. I don't think this is going to be that good.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, like especially against Fi too, right? They're running Ember Blade, so this is kind of like a little less. And then even if you use it, ideally like a buffed Phoenix Flame, right? That's like your ideal target into a Fi. You still blocked a 2-power attack with a 3 block. Sure, it's kind of a free 3 block, but I think one of the issues I have with that card is that Uzuri doesn't really utilize unknown cards terribly well in most situations, right? Like if you draw a random card off the top of your deck, the chances of that card actually fitting your hand isn't that high. You know what I mean?
Yes,
there's a decent chance that you draw something that just doesn't work with what your hand is trying to do, and then that all you got basically doesn't really do anything. That's kind of the issue I have with that card.
That's exactly why it's a 1-of. Yeah, and now 0.
And now cut from the deck. Okay, but yeah, it's fair to give it a consideration and try it out and see if maybe it can do something that's actually beneficial for the deck. And that's why we try cards, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah. My philosophy is you will never be fully prepared for an event. Yeah. So you may as well try some new things here and there, because A, you'll be playing against higher quality of opponent usually, and B, this preparation thing is like total myth. You're always getting better, you're always learning things. So test new ideas regularly.
There's no bad experiences to be had, basically, in trying out stuff, right? You can always learn something, take something away, and then improve for the next time. All right, that's the list. Obviously, it will be linked down in the description of the video, so if you want to check it out, this is like the latest iteration of, I just want to say like the stealth Uzuri build, because at this point, you can't really call it Redline. I think we should kind of try to move past those naming conventions, and this is just, that's the stealth build. I'm just going to call it that now. And obviously there's always iterations on this, right? There's probably around about 10 to 15 cards in this that are kind of like really flexible and that you will see fluctuating between events, just because that's how Uzuri works, right? Like you adapt to whatever the meta is that you're expecting, and that's how the deck operates. You need to be able to have that mental flexibility to constantly reevaluate the deck and go through not every card, right? You have your core, the core swaps, E-Strike, the isolates, that kind of stuff. That doesn't really change. You don't touch that. But you have these like flexible poppers. You have the flexible, defensive options in the form of like the traps and maybe stuff like sigils, stuff like that. All you got, these kind of cards. You need to reevaluate those constantly and just figure out, okay, what is it that I'm expecting to see, and how do I best, prepare against that? That's basically how it goes.
Yep.
And with that being said, let's jump into the video.
So while you get that set up, I'll do some story time. So my opponent here is Kyle F., who is also a Florida local of sorts. We're from different parts of the state, but I played against him before. The last time I played against him was the very last week of ProQuest Season 4. And he was on Dorinthea, I was on Uzuri. So the same matchup.
All right.
In this match, it was in Swiss, I should say. In this match, he was on Dawnblade, and I was on a pretty similar list, I would say. I did have Shred Blue at the time, but it was a fatigue match after all.
Okay.
because Dawnblade Dori just turns out isn't so efficient when your opponent has lots of D-reacts to stop the counters.
True.
Right. So in that match, I won in a pretty similar fashion, just like the last cycle or two of my deck, through a pitch stack. So here I was expecting Kyle to be on Dawnblade again,
Oh, okay. Right.
because that match was so close.
Yeah.
But we're about to see he actually does have the Greataxe.
Right. Okay. So you think that maybe he went from that experience that he had against you, and he went like, okay, I've basically had to fatigue this Uzuri because my regular Dawnblade plan of getting a bunch of counters and then just having this like inevitable win condition where I just outvalue them didn't work because he has so many D-reacts. So if I'm playing fatigue, I might as well pick the weapon that does that a little better. You think that's kind of like maybe what he was going for with this?
I think that is pretty close to what his logic would have been. I didn't ask him after the game, unfortunately, because the round was like literally over.
Oh yeah. Like you cut it really close.
Yeah.
Going to time with that game. Yeah.
Yeah. In case the round timer doesn't match up, by the way, one of the judges at the beginning said we had an extension because we had to set up the stream elements.
Right.
Okay, right. So I think he might have had this logic switching to Greataxe because of the last match. But if you look at, I'll just spoil a little bit. There are times that Kyle pitches a yellow and a red to attack with his weapon.
Yep.
So I don't think his deck list was actually optimized for pitching a blue into the Greataxe. I think it's just like a one card change he can make. Just for Uzuri, basically.
it's probably like a hybrid list where he just runs because I mean we're gonna see it now, but as far as I remember, he also didn't really run any of the axe specific cards, right? Stuff like Felling Swing or something like that, where you can kind of take advantage of opponents' off turns a little more efficiently and actually utilize like a large hand that's given to you. Because like the pure axe bills, or like the ones that lean a little heavier on the Decimator Greataxe, typically run these cards where if you give them a larger hand, suddenly they're swinging the axe at you for like 10 or something, and then you kind of have to be like, okay, this is actually like hurtful amounts of damage that I can't just ignore. All right. Why don't we start this? You should have control over the video.
I just started it here.
Yep.
It looks like it is playing at normal speed.
Yep.
Okay. I won the die roll, I believe, and chose to go second because against a Dawnblade, you definitely want to go second.
Yeah.
Here, I'm checking the text on Greataxe again. And we can see Kyle is already setting up a pitch stack. He's got a yellow next to his CNC. And the yellow is a twinning blade, so like his thing doesn't even have to hit for him to CNC.
Yeah. Actually, I'm right now, I'm not 100% sure Twinning Blade even works on the Greataxe, to be honest.
Oh, does it say target sword?
I think it says target sword, actually.
Oh, wow.
I am not 100% sure about this.
So here I'm struggling to pick up my hand because there are some fringes on this playmat that made it a little difficult, like the corners would catch.
Oh, okay.
But okay, so now that I see that Kyle's on Greataxe, I sort of have to be thinking about, to your point, some damage on each turn cycle so that I don't get punished for attacking him like for 5 or whatever.
Yep.
But also what cards am I setting up so that I have a strong second cycle.
Yep, makes sense.
So I believe I had an all-red hand, and the best choice I had here was just to attack with Command and Conquer, which is not so bad. If he does have lots and lots of D-reacts, this could force a block that he doesn't enjoy.
So because he's playing a hybrid list, right, that normally probably runs Dawnblade and then just kind of can flex to the axe if he really has to, I would imagine he's on like probably not a crazy number of D-reacts, right? I would expect like sinks probably, and then a number of Steelblade shunts. Usually, I think you run like the reds and the blues if you want them.
So the tunic tips us off to he's definitely on a number of shunts.
Yep.
In the match we played in November at that ProQuest, he actually had 8. So he had 6.
8 shunts.
The red. red and blue, and then 2 yellow.
Two
Yeah.
yellows. Wow. Okay, that's a lot. I mean, it's a great card, right? Like 1 resource for 6 block is insane amounts of efficiency. And then sometimes you have the added utility of being able to actually kill your opponent with it, right? If you're at 1 and you attack him with a dagger, it's a calculated gamble where if he has a shunt, you're just dead, right?
Yes. So we updated the life totals here from the prior turn.
Yep.
This is the first time we had played on the stream table on the day, so we're getting used to it a little.
Okay. So
I led this turn with a Nerve Scalpel, yep.
And then you come in with the Isolate from Arsenal. Classic move.
Yeah. So Nerve Scalpel, Kyle is just double checking that, in fact, it turns off his, like if he blocked with a Iron Song response, for instance, even though it's an attack reaction, it still gets hurt.
It's one of the only matchups where that's actually relevant. That it doesn't only reduce D-reacts, it also reduces attack reactions. And yeah, this is... I think this and a mirror are basically like the only matchups where that's actually relevant. And then sometimes maybe into Ninja if they block with Ancestral Empowerment. I was like, my brain immediately went to Ancestral Recall, and I was like, no, wrong game. That's a different one.
So Kyle does have his Sync Below. It covers up a perfect 6.
Sure.
So interestingly, like if I did Flick Knives there, the Sync Below would have been debuffed twice.
Yeah,
but that's definitely not worth it at this stage.
No. You don't want to flick in like the first 2 turns of the game with your opponent still at like almost 40 health. It's not worth it in this situation, especially against a deck like Decimator Greataxe, right? That doesn't really utilize large hands very efficiently anyway, so.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue to this turn cycle. I paused quickly here.
Sure.
Kyle pitched a blue to attack with his Greataxe. Now, I should have understood, as you mentioned earlier, that a deck playing stuff like Twinning Blade shouldn't be able to utilize the axe-specific cards, which normally front pump the Greataxe if you were to play them. So with a card left in his hand, I sort of figured it was either a D-react or nothing. So my blocking decision here is based on that, and I think I got it wrong. And I actually did this at least once this game, so I want to make sure I point them out, these mistakes, so we can learn from them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So basically, the consideration here has to be, is his last card an Iron Song response? Right. And if it is, what do I do? Assuming it is an Iron Song, I should wait on this Fate Foreseen to try to get full value out of it, instead of using it as the only card I defend with. We'll see here. But we'll see here what Kyle has.
He does have the Iron Song, yeah. Okay.
So here, I should have converted an extra 3 block in my hand into, well, let's see. Because the Fate Foreseen goes down to 2 block, I take 5. If instead some random stealth card was a 2 block and this was a 4 block, then I only take 1 damage. Yes. Yeah, so I basically lost 4 value depending on how you equate an extra dagger swing here.
That's kind of the issue with Greataxe, right? Like normally against Dorinthea, if they're on a Dawnblade build, you want a lot of D-reacts because that's the most efficient way, to sort of counter her stuff. Especially if you can park those D-reacts in Arsenal so they don't trigger Reprise. But one of the issues with Greataxe is that it just makes Sync Below and Fate Foreseen specifically so incredibly inefficient if they're the only thing you're blocking with that turn. And because of the damage the axe deals if it's naked, right? It's just 4 damage. Typically, you don't really want to block it with 2 cards. Unless, of course, the opponent does, in fact, have like something to buff it up, like an Iron Song or something.
Yeah, that's right.
And then usually you don't really want to block that. And that's kind of the issue with this. It really punishes having all of those defense reactions that you normally put in your deck when you're expecting a Dawnblade. And then when they run the Decimator Greataxe, you get punished for that, and you have to run really inefficient blocks now, right? That's kind of what the weapon thrives on.
Yep. So just summarizing this turn cycle, I attacked with both daggers. Kyle blocked the Nerve Scalpel because, as it turns out, he had a D-react in hand that he wanted to defend for full value.
Yeah, makes sense. And so, run through again is a card that does not work on Decimator Greataxe. So it makes
Yep.
perfect sense to block with it there, because it's just
Yes.
doesn't do anything for your hand. It's a yellow, so it doesn't really pitch very efficiently.
Correct. And so here Kyle plays his first CNC, which, given that I'm on lots of D-Reacts, can be a little tricky to block.
Yep.
And it's 5 because of the frailty token.
Yep. What I find also interesting is that he doesn't, and that's kind of like where I'm not entirely sure what kind of list he runs. But then also I'm by no means an expert on Dorinthea, right? He pitched a yellow finals fighting spirit here.
Yep.
Yeah, and actually the casters just called that one out as well.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that this is mostly for the Dromai matchup, because you need some number of poppers in a deck, and this is a popper that actually can gain you 1 life if you use it at the right time. But
Yep.
I don't actually know if that's like the reasoning behind running it.
Right. So that's a good thing to point out. That Fighting Spirit does, I think, block later in the game for only 2. So I actually had to defend the CNC with a Hurl, which is kind of annoying, and another 3 block.
Yep.
The Hurl ideally goes to face.
Sure.
But at this stage, I still valued my Crown of Provenance highly enough. And I just want to pause. Kyle did block 6 on my stealth card, which denied a swap.
Yep.
This is actually kind of fine, in my opinion. I get the same effect as if the swap goes through, which is 2 cards out of his deck. But in this case, he can afford not to have the D-React because it does not have Dominate.
And more importantly, you keep the threat in your deck, right?
Yes. Yep.
Which is also, in specifically this situation, very relevant, because you run out of threats to swap in way before you run out of stealth cards, typically. So losing a red infect here is not the end of the world, but losing like a CNC or a death touch or something is definitely relevant. So
yeah. So this one coming in for 4 that I'm considering blocking must mean I have something poor in my hand offensively. The hand cams aren't quite high enough fidelity for me to see.
Yeah.
It actually looks like I blocked with a red shred, which it's pretty interesting. So
yeah, I would assume that this is normally like a very high value card to keep.
It is a high value card. So what I have learned from playing against Greataxe is, if you're not taking opportunities early to protect your life total, you won't be able to set up good endgame turns that force a lot of damage. And you can see my hand was kind of crap.
Okay. Double looking
all red
scrap with no targets in the graveyard.
No targets. No targets.
Makes
and the
sense.
shred as like just extra extra salt in the wound of such a bad hand.
To be fair, getting the second looking for a scrap to the bottom of the deck is really good, because a second cycle looking for a scrap is really powerful. So like, it's not, the end of the world. But obviously, this turn cycle, from your perspective, it does not feel very great, I would assume.
Right. At this stage in the game, I'm pretty worried that I'm not going to be able to get across the line.
Yep. Understandable, yeah.
So the nice thing, though, is I have presented a breakpoint. So here comes 1 damage for Kyle. Yep. And like you say, one of the strongest cards in the deck is at the bottom.
Yep, absolutely. Out of curiosity, do you remember the respective deck sizes that the 2 of you decided to run for this game?
Kyle, I think, played all of his 3 blocks, and then I think it was 2 Fighting Spirit yellow, something like that. And I played 68 cards. So the only ones that I didn't present are Erase Face and Humble, because they, in my opinion, don't do enough against the Dawnblade version, which
makes sense.
Is the hedge, right? Like, you don't really want 2 blocks against Dawnblade. Rabble for 4, and I kept my whole hand. So Kyle ought to expect a decent turn.
Yep.
And I think he smartly declines to block this.
Yep. That makes sense. Like, if you're in a situation like this, you don't really want to block the vanilla damage. But now you're coming in with the Nimble Strike, and that's approaching the territory where he has to, dedicate some cards to block the vanilla damage, because otherwise he's just running out of life really quickly.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly the type of thing you want to do against Fatigue. You want to stack all of your damage in 1 turn.
Yep.
And obviously you do that with Go Again.
the good first cycle pitch stack here. Sometimes
What?
you just draw into hands that work beautifully, and if the opponent doesn't have any kind of disruption, and I think the only disruption that his deck runs is CNC.
Yep.
You can just play out a 5-card hand, and sometimes that's something that Uzuri can do. Yep.
Yeah, so this was 4 cards for 6 plus 9. So 4 cards for 15 with the CNC on hit.
Yep.
Very nice.
And he's just giving the Crown of Providence here. Just goes like, all right. So this is kind of interesting because he knew that was your turn. So he kind of consciously hung on to 4 cards. And
yeah,
I'm kind of curious to see, because I watched this game before, but I don't really remember what he's cracking back with in this spot.
So I think the contrast on the warrior cards is high enough that I could spot in his hand multiple shots.
Okay.
So what I think he was doing is expecting a swap play as my final chain link, but actually it was Command and Conquer with no stealth card, so no reactions period.
So he had to block like that because he had too many D-reacts to actually do anything. Okay. Makes sense.
What's funny is that this is exactly the type of thing Dawnblade Dorinthea with CNC is trying to do.
Yeah.
They'll like send Dawnblade with Go again. The opponent's like, oh crap, like I need to deny a counter. I'll wait until they give me more information, and then they just slap the CNC and like all your D-reacts get stuck.
Yep. True. I don't know if you didn't have a stealth card or if that was like a deliberate decision to send a CNC face up, but it definitely worked out very well in your favor.
Yeah. So my arsenal has been there for a while. I'm pretty sure it's just a Death Touch and it hasn't lined up properly.
Right.
Now I'm defending with the Crown. Okay, so my arsenal must just be one of the worst cards in existence.
Stuck.
It's been there since turn 1, right? And I don't think we've got to see the hand.
Okay, he's coming in with a blue overpower here, pumping that up by 4, and then you have nice, very good, yeah. You just clean block that with the Fate Foreseen. Very nice.
Yeah, I think having your D-React line up when they have a large hand is pretty fortunate. So I'm very happy to have gotten that block value.
The D-Reacts are good when you're forced or, priced into blocking with something else anyways. But if the D-React is your only block for the turn, obviously it gets a lot worse against Decimator,
Yep. I also blocked with an Amnesia. And again, the Crown of Providence. So my hand is probably just another stinker.
Yeah. It happens. Oh, yeah.
Here we are. Yeah, pitching a Nimblism Death Touch. So not great. But, okay. Nimblism Death Touch is one of the ways to force a lot of damage. We know there's a looking for a scrap, maybe 3 or 4 cards above that Nimblism. So I might be able to set up a stack that is... as I just passed the turn here. Yeah, so my hand was terrible. In any case, I might be able to get a Nimblism looking for a scrap, stealth touch, death touch in the late game. That's what I'm thinking right now.
So, like, the only good thing, right, about a hand like this into this deck specifically is that you just kind of know he doesn't have good ways of converting large hands into damage efficiently.
Yep, and
so,
as you mentioned, a buff on the axe is where you actually can devote multiple cards efficiently. So blocking 5 on 5, he needs to have the attack react in order to come over, and then even if he has it, he still needs enough pitch to swing again.
Exactly. And that's very quickly approaching the territory of where he can't really do all of that in one turn.
Right. Especially given his list is not blue heavy.
Exactly. Okay, so he has the Out for Blood, and this is probably just punching to get some extra damage across. And again, you clean it up. Very nice.
Yeah. I suppose that is the upside of the way I've drawn my hands, is that the defense has been there almost every turn, which is why my offense has been bad, and it just kind of lined up with his attack reacts a couple times. All right, so the turn where I pitched Nimblism Death Touch, I had another Death Touch in hand. So that went straight to Arsenal, and 1 card 6.
Yep, solid. I mean, you don't expect this to get damage across, but it does kind of demand 2 cards, and that just means that and you have a Shred to back it up. Okay, that's suddenly a lot more interesting,
Yeah. Shred representing 5 damage if he doesn't
but
react.
he does have the
Yep.
shunt. Okay, but
And that's
I
a
mean,
red shunt.
it's a red shunt, right? So he kind of wasted, in quotation marks, right, like 3 value off of that block.
Yeah.
So that's not too shabby overall.
Oh yeah. So Kyle, as we watch more, I'm starting to think he's playing his whole stack. He's got the down and dirty.
Down and dirty. So I'm thinking he was really hedging hard for Dromai with some of the card choices in his deck, right? Like the Finalist Fighting Spirit, the D&D. I think a lot of these extra cards that he's putting in here are just like his Dromai hate cards, basically, right? And he's just going, right, I'm gonna try to fatigue this guy. Might as well bring the whole pile. And that's basically
it. So here's another 4-card hand from myself. E-Strike would go again.
Nice.
Into a face-up CMC, and I'm putting a Shred now next to one of those death touches at the bottom.
That's kind of the beauty of running yellow and also blue Shred, right? Like, they naturally just end up on the bottom because you pitch them so often. And generally with Uzuri, I feel like you don't really have to consciously work towards making a pitch stack in a lot of the times, right? Like, it just kind of naturally happens because the cards that you want to pitch are also the cards that you want to have on the bottom. And then sometimes just because of the way the deck works, you're forced to pitch reds anyways, just because you don't run a ton of blues and yellows. So sometimes you just have to pitch some reds, and then the pitch stacking kind of does itself, right? You don't have to work terribly hard to do it.
So I paused the game here to take an account of the life totals.
Yep.
So on the prior turn, I leaked 5 damage on Kyle. And he saved, I believe, a sink below to go to his arsenal and a blue to attack with the weapon.
Yep.
I think the reason he did this is, with me still being above 20 life, fatigue is actually nowhere near happening.
Yeah.
I'm still, 6 turns away from dying to his weapon. So he must have felt he still had to pressure somewhat instead of blocking an extra 3 on the prior turn.
Makes sense, yeah.
So that's actually the thing, is because Uzuri has so many tools against defensive heroes, just blocking won't get you there. You have to fatigue by damage a little bit.
Yeah. Like, I generally think fatigue without disruption in this game isn't really possible. Or
just maybe Arachne with a million contract cards.
Yeah, Arachne works because of the way the contract mechanic specifically works. And I think contracts kind of are disruption. They're just disruption on like a different axis, right? It disrupts your opponent's overall game instead of their individual turn by turn,
Right. And we see Kyle did actually have the sink below, which cleans up nicely the Leave No Witness.
Yep.
Yep.
So he played that from Arsenal, so obviously flicking in this spot wasn't really worth it, but maybe let's just, pause the video for a quick second there. If he still had an Arsenal, hypothetically speaking, in this spot, would you be tempted to flick at this juncture of the game when you're both around like 20 life and you can get a Arsenal out of the Leave No Witnesses? Or would you go like, okay, no, this is still too early. I can still get more value out of the flick later in the game.
Right. I would not be inclined to flick. I think this is a mistake that's pretty easy to find yourself making. You do the flick knives on Nerve Scalpel when that dereact, actually gets disrupted by the flick knife.
Yep.
The reason I think it's premature is because in these longer games, you actually need stuff to do with your pitch.
Yeah.
Kind of, turns 15 through 20, something like that. Which means, like if you only have one dagger, you don't have as good of a pitch outlet.
Yeah, true.
In addition, I'd be throwing the dagger that actually debuffs most of the cards in his deck, which is not a good idea.
Fair.
So on top of that, the game isn't actually about turn cycle efficiency. It is close to being like that because we're at our life totals are so near each other.
Yeah.
But the game is really about, do I have enough cards in my deck to kill him?
Yeah.
And so like taking one more out of his deck isn't a huge thing.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay, so you're switching into Shakedown.
Yep. So isolating the Shakedown.
You're showcasing the proper procedure on how to activate Uzuri here, right? Like,
yes.
activate her, you banish the card face down that you want to swap in, and then you go to your opponent and go like, any reactions, because they have a window to react before the swap actually happens.
Yes. So now this actually did hit, which reveals likely no D-React on Arsenal.
Yep.
And I get a choice of color. If I recall, I'm considering this, and then I believe I choose blue.
Right. And he
Yep,
does
so
have
I get a blue.
Okay.
Yep. And so the reasoning behind this is I've seen, like at this point, I now understand he's not a dedicated axe deck.
Yeah.
And if I take the last blue in his hand, he has a really inefficient way to swing his axe, which is like this.
Tunic and then pitch 2 reds. Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. Like, his deck is probably on 20 to 25 blues, I would say. Something in that order. Probably no more than that. And I think a dedicated Decimator deck would run probably minimum 30.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
And his deck is also diluted with, Down and Dirty and
Down and Dirty,
Yellow.
Finalist, Fighting Spirit, like random stuff that he just put in the pile to, increase his card count. Yeah. And that's always kind of the issue if you decide to run above 60, right? Like, you dilute your cards. There's no way around it. Like, you dilute what your deck can do and how efficient every single one of your turns is going to be.
Yeah, which is something that affects my deck too.
Oh yeah.
Basically, every time I saw a defense reaction this game, I've needed that D-React to line up with a big hand from Kyle.
Yeah.
In order for that hand to be efficient.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so here we see another one of the situational meta-dependent D-Reacts in the pitch zone for me. That all you got? Kind of a nice upside that I can pitch to a dagger.
I mean, it makes sense to run it in that matchup, right? Because against Dorinthea, you kind of just want to have as many D-Reacts as you can, just because they're so good against her. Yep. And you don't even care that they only block 3, because most of her attack reactions only buff her 3, so it kind of, equals out in that way.
So here, the Death Touch did hit for 3.
Yep.
Again, we know from a couple turn cycles ago that Kyle doesn't have the D-React on Arsenal at the moment, otherwise he would have done it on the shakedown.
Yes. Kind of curious what his Arsenal actually is at this point, because he's been sitting on it for a bit. And
we're going to see him play it out.
Red Warrior's Valor, all right.
Yeah, so likely this got there on one of his larger hand turns, and he just hasn't had a good way to play it out yet.
Yep.
In part because his resource curve is greedy.
Yeah. If you need a blue every time you want to attack, it's kind of inefficient. But I mean, this is actually kind of threatening, right? Because this is coming in for 7. And no matter what he has in hand, it's going to be enough to swing the axe a second time. And you're at 15. Correct. So if you don't block any of this, that puts you to 3, which is definitely very, very dangerous. So
for that reason, I am going to block it out. And similar to the earlier case, he needs a reaction and pitch to swing again, which he can't do. So
can't do both, yeah. That's kind of the beauty of playing against the axe, right? Because you can play around their tricks fairly efficiently. So he did have the reaction, but like you said, he wouldn't have had the pitch to actually come in for a second swing here. And you had got to keep 2 cards, and 2 cards is sometimes all Uzuri needs.
Right. Like Kyle pitched his Iron Storm response actually to clear the Blood Rot token.
Yep.
And he also accomplished clearing his arsenal on that turn. So I think it's honestly not that bad for him.
Yeah.
The bad thing is I presented another breakpoint, and he's dwindling down now at 11.
He's leaking, and the closer you get to like the sub 10 life totals is where Uzuri really starts to shine, I think. And then sub 5 is where she's like absolutely deadly. But sub 10 is already a spot where Uzuri gets a whole lot more dangerous compared to higher life totals.
Yeah, so that being said, at this point, I'm really just trying to make sure my life total is high enough so that I can do a 5-card hand when he's at sub 10.
Yep, makes sense.
So that's why this block takes a little while. I'm considering giving 2 cards, and in the end, just give 1.
And again, block with the red shred.
And, I lied. I gave 2 cards.
Okay, you gave should try.
Yeah. So it is that it's that consideration. Like, will I have enough life to execute my pitch stack, which involves looking for a scrap, nimblism, death touch.
Yep.
All these cards block too. All these cards I'd much rather use on offense.
Makes sense, yeah.
So the weird thing is, like, I've cast one shred this game for actually no effect aside from eating a D-react. And yet the life totals are where they are. So I think there's a chance Kyle could have played more defensive, but if he had played more defensive, I'd have all these red shreds at the bottom of my deck. So I'm not sure that a different strategy would have actually worked for him.
I think what happened to him was that the face-up CNCs kind of, always happened on turns where he had D-reacts.
Yep.
And then that obviously made him a little bit inefficient on those turns, and kind of he had to keep larger hands even though he probably didn't necessarily want to at the time. It's just kind of how the game played out. Yeah. All right.
So I'm pausing here to shout out the card that was in my arsenal for a few turns here. Yep. It's a Spreading Plague. This is a card that Ben convinced me to play. I have had mixed results. Here I think is pretty clear mixed result. I used the Tunic to cast it, made one Blood Rot token. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure I need my arsenal open here.
Yeah, you have a Codex turn, right? You need to cast it there. Yeah, Spreading Plague is kind of, I don't know. The good thing about Spreading Plague is it never clunks you up, right? You can use it on any attack, right? It's the only assassin attack reaction that has 0 restrictions on what you can use it on. That's kind of the good thing about it.
So the upside that I like that Spreading Plague has is it's really hard for Dromai to block the Blood Rot tokens. So it can be worth, almost true damage against Dromai. But I think after this tournament, it came up so few times, even against my Dromai opponents, that I don't know, maybe it's not for me after all.
I think Spreading Plague is definitely very much a card that is one of those personal preference things, right? Where you just, either you like it or you don't. And there's not a whole lot of ways to figure that out without just, trying the card, obviously.
You're blocking with black so this is pretty interesting. Kyle has a way to do 6 damage with 2 cards. Yeah. It's 6 because of the Frailty token. Sure. But this Blood Rot token is going to get him. I wonder if on this turn cycle he would have been better off just pitching to the Blood Rot. Yeah. Given that the Frailty token is there, he doesn't even get a good rate on the swing.
One thing I'm just noticing now is actually you decided to run Greataxe in that matchup instead of Snapdragons, and you do have Snapdragons in the list, so that was a conscious decision. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? I kind of feel like against any deck that is either defensive or has the option of going defensive if they want to, and that's definitely Dorinthea, no matter what version of her she's on, right? No matter what weapons they run, all of their cards block 3, pretty much. So I feel like against any defensive deck, I usually want Snapdragons over the Greataxe just because of that guaranteed go again is just so strong against defensive decks. Why did you decide to run Greataxe?
Yeah, part of it is that in our first match, Kyle and I, or our first rated match together, which again was in late November during the ProQuest season, he did present the Dawnblade.
Yep.
And 1 point of defense against Dawnblade is the difference between playing around Singing Steelblade and not playing around it. Like if Dorinthea presents one of these kind of oppressive combo hands that have 3 or 4 specialization cards in it and, Twinning Blade or whatever,
Yeah.
Being able to play around that once per game, I find pretty valuable.
Okay.
So now having seen that Kyle is actually just full committing to fatigue, I'd much rather have the Snapdragons.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. So it was just basically a hedge on him flipping
it's a hedge against Dawnblade.
Yeah, okay.
Because, so the thing is, if you deny Dawnblade counters, oh wow, okay. I just want to talk about this. So Ravenous Reveler, Reveal the Blue Infect, comes in for 2.
Yep.
And Kyle doesn't block it at all, which might be a mistake given his life total.
At 7 life total, that's definitely a mistake, yeah. It kind of feels, it just kind of, you want to give the opponent the disrespect. If they flip a blue rabble, you just go okay, fuck it, it's just 2, I don't need to block this. But I think at this kind of life total, when you're at 7, you might have to. To be fair, he still has like the 3 block on the Braveforge braces, right? He hasn't touched those at all. So his actual life total is still somewhat higher than the 7 because he still
Yeah,
has 4 block in equipment that he can cash in if he needs to. But
this is
yeah,
true. Yeah, it's just like Kyle is a good player, so he's
yeah.
just trying to maximize the defensive value of his hand.
Yeah, I think that's where this is going.
Yeah.
He just goes like, if I
Yep.
block anything else, I'm gonna get the full value from that, and if I block the rabble, I'm gonna waste, one point of block there. So,
Yep. So here's I think I present Kyle with something of a puzzle.
mm-hmm.
I had this stealth card in my hand. I didn't play the stealth card. I didn't pitch
Yeah.
it to a dagger. I just cast a
Yeah.
shakedown. So like, what the heck what am I going for here?
I think like this hand is telegraphing a shred, and I think you were pretty specifically bluffing a shred in this
Yes,
situation, right?
I was indeed, because I
Yeah.
had the sigil.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
So Kyle sniffed it out. He called my bluff. He just blocked 6.
Yep, makes sense. But that's kind of the thing about sigil is like it doesn't matter if he calls the bluff or not. you still
Right.
you still win. And I mean
Yeah.
he has to block because he's at 7, right? So he kind of
Right.
he can't just go no blocks and then get hit by 6, even if you can't turn it on. And you
Right.
could, right? You can still flick you can flick the Spider's Bite to turn on the shakedown if you have to. So
Yeah. Or use the black text.
I love that. Like Nathan going, Uzuri
Yeah.
gets fatigued in this matchup every time.
Yeah, well, he gets to play against a really good Dorinthea and Josh Lau, and maybe that's his experience.
Makes sense. And E-Strike for 7, also very nice. Solid
Yep, good break point.
Yep.
And I think a Death Touch is going to Arsenal, if I see my hand cam correctly.
Yep, that does look like a Death Touch, yes.
It was that or a stealth card. I couldn't quite see.
Okay.
So Kyle actually used a shunt from Arsenal on this E-Strike. That's oh man, I gotta wonder what his hand is. Maybe he's thinking he can force damage.
Could be. Okay, so it's
Okay,
just
yeah.
a CNC.
It's a CNC. So at this stage,
interesting.
because I just arsenaled the Death Touch, I know I'm near my pitch stack, which involves looking for a scrap and nimblism as well.
All of that stuff.
And shred, yep. All this stuff. So the CNC is very annoying. I think I looked at Kyle's graveyard at one point before this, counted 2 CNCs, and I was like, oh man, I hope the third one doesn't come around. Though given the time on this match, maybe that happens later on. In any case, CNC is actually really annoying because not only do I have these large hands I'm trying to set up, but I run a bunch of D-reacts, so sometimes you can get got.
Yep. Okay, and he even brought the Remembrance, all right?
Yeah, he brought the Remembrance, and I'll be honest, when he started moving his hand forward in the reaction step, I thought I was getting pummeled, but...
Imagine getting pummeled, get pummeled by a Dorinthea. That would be like... Yeah. The ultimate disrespect is running pummel in Dorinthea. Like, you just don't give a fuck. Yeah.
So Kyle here, he's actually showing what his game plan is. He put in 3 red warrior, like, weapon buffs, basically.
Yeah, I know. I think it was 2 of the +3s, right? The front pump, and then 1 Iron Song Determination for dominate, right? So he's going, okay. Yep. I think his game plan is still kind of fatigue, but he's recognized correctly that he needs to fatigue through damage, and he can't just block you out because that's just not going to work.
Yeah. So if he were trying to just block me out, I think he would end up fatiguing himself because of the daggers.
Yeah. Daggers are so
efficient in any case,
in that situation.
I think what he probably should have done is let that chain link resolve and put back some Command and Conquers in his deck. In any case, I'm attacking with the dagger into Leave No Witness, which buys armor block.
It does. It kind of does the same, I think, Command and Conquer, right? Like, it forces you to block with 2 cards. So
yeah.
Sort of the same as when he's coming in with a pumped Dawnblade, right? You have to block with 2 cards. So
yeah. So if we look at this blocking pattern, he put a reaction in front of the Nerve Scalpel, and then a non-reaction card for the Leave No Witnesses. Yep. So I'm thinking he might have a reaction to go on his axe. But no, it turns out he was just blocking as much damage as he could to send 7 back at me.
I mean, that's an efficient 2-card play, right?
It is. And this is what he put back with Remembrance.
With like the debuff from the Decimator Greataxe is a really, really efficient 2-card hand. The problem is you're still at 13, so it's not necessarily as impactful as he would maybe want it to be. You definitely have to block this, right? But it's probably fine blocking this with like 1 card even. Go down.
So I have a looking for a scrap, surgical extraction, a backstab, and it looks like a Codex is the last card.
Codex or Shred, maybe?
A yellow pitch, either way.
Yep.
So to your point, I need to consider blocking with 2 cards. I also need to consider that damage stack that I'm trying to set up.
Yep.
So I think my main priority, given this hand, is to pitch the Codex. The reason for this is if I can have a situation where Kyle's not on an arsenal, then the Codex will kind of act like Winner's Bite in the final turn.
Yep. Very, very late game Codex is definitely a really strong play, just because you take a card out of their hand.
Yeah, so right here is actually, I'm looking for his CNCs. Like I'm trying to figure out how often or for how long can I sit on this arsenal. And I do know my pitch stack has several 2 blocks in it. So that's why this block is taking so long. When the CNC comes,
no armor left to speak of. Because you really don't want to block with flick knives, because that basically takes away your win condition. And obviously you want to block with Tunic as late in the game as possible. So I give 5 block. So I think this turn cycle is kind of what Kyle was hoping to achieve maybe 2 or 3 turns ago, is get me to block with cards now. Now he's starting to threaten fatigue by damage. So I think this shows that if his deck had been a bit more efficient in the mid game, maybe instead of 11 life, I'm at something more like 8 or less, and then his strategy really starts to look scary. Because most of my threats are, not most, but a lot of my threats are dwindling at this point. So red isolate from Arsenal. Yeah, and that isolate is, I think, just bluffing a swap, right? Because the last card in your hand is looking for a scrap.
Yep, that's right.
So this is really just, okay, you need to give me a card here, because if you don't block this and I have a swap, you're dead, because you're at 6.
Yeah.
And
something I think I should have considered on this turn cycle, which I say should have because I know in my head at the time I was not considering it. I should have thought of keeping one of those blues as a swap target, knowing that it's not going to get through a D-React, but just to force him to use it.
Yeah, okay.
The trade-off obviously is 3 life, so a pretty hard choice either way.
Yeah, 3 life is at this juncture pretty relevant, so yeah.
Yeah, when he can routinely buff his weapon up to 11 with all the reds he put back, it's like, kinda pretty scary.
You kind of don't want to go sub 10 if you can avoid it.
Right. So here Kyle is considering his block. He probably, at this point, he has to put me on a swap, because if he doesn't, he could just straight up die.
Yeah.
So he's just making sure he does the right play.
Yep. Blocks for 3.
And defends with a red card, and I just pass the turn.
Yep. No, that's like what you wanted to do. Like, I mean, I think there's a consideration where you're trying to keep red isolates in the deck, but that would require you to play out your previous hands in a different way. You can pitch stack, like Nimblism, Shred, Isolate for the kill turn. That's something you can do with this deck, but the way you've played out the game doesn't really allow for that end game interaction anymore. So you can just kind of play out the Isolate and just let it go at this point.
Yeah, and I'm nodding my head here on camera. I don't know if it's covered up too much or not, but this is the CNC that I was waiting for, and of course I drew a sink below in this hand, so it's like, come on, man. Like, I don't want to lose on this turn. I say lose. I don't want my best chance of winning to get blown up from my arsenal on this turn. Yeah, because that looking for a scrap is going to set up a turn that he just can't block all the damage. So.
That's a really important card right now.
So I think it's this turn cycle that sends the match close to time, because I'm trying to recall
tanking
exactly
so
my
long, yeah.
pitch, and I think we can just kind of skip forward here a little bit. Okay, here we are.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Declaring the block finally, but I have to block with a nimblism and my tunic, which
And
is
you
very
tunic, yeah,
sad.
that is kind of unfortunate, but
Yeah,
sometimes you have to do it that way.
sometimes you
And
do. That's
your finger was like twitching towards the flick knives there for a second, but I think
yeah.
you correctly identified that flick knives is basically what's gonna allow you to win this.
Pretty
And
much.
you have to, even though it hurts, you have to give the tunic here.
Yeah.
And that's
So
just how it goes.
now I've kept what I believe is a sink below, which I could not defend with,
Yeah.
and another card that is critical to this pitch stack.
Yep.
So I'm just debating if I actually pitch that card or not. And the arsenal again is looking for a scrap.
Mm-hmm.
So indeed, I think I'm considering just passing the turn here.
Yeah. Hoping, because he can't have another CNC, right? That was the third one. So
yeah.
You're gonna get full use out of that D-React. Okay, yeah, you just pass it back.
So I'm pretty sure the last card was a Death Touch. So my hand is like Stealth, Shred, Death Touch, and Sink Below. I'm quite sure.
Pretty solid. Okay, and here he comes with that big dominated swing, right?
Yep. But he had to pitch a yellow and a red, thankfully, so it's actually not that efficient.
So he can't have a follow-up to this, even if he had a way to give it go again, or like, he can pop the boots, obviously.
Right. And so here I just take it because my hand does what I've been waiting to do. It's like, eat his damage and come back.
Yeah, like if he had 2 blues on this turn cycle, that would look a lot different, because then he can do that 8 dominate and then swing in again for 5.
Yep.
Which would be pretty devastating, but yeah.
Okay, looking for a scrap, the thing I had to pitch on, like turn 3 or something.
Then he blocks that with a card, goes down to 4. And this is like 5 is the strongest breakpoint you can present, right? Because it's like, I don't want to block.
Pretty good.
I don't want to block with 2 cards. Even through like a D-React, you're gonna leak at least 1 point of damage.
Right. So here I pause to consider flicking the Spider's Bite. The reason I would do that is if I thought the game was ending on the next turn. So I'm just like double checking that that's not the right play, because I'm pretty sure it's not at this point. I think there's one more hand that I have to draw before the last one of the game. And again, that last hand that I'm trying to set up has a Codex of Frailty in it.
Yep.
Okay, so the other part of the stack is Stealth card plus Death Touch. So here Kyle's got to respect a swap. I have 2 cards in hand. And if he has a D-React, the question is whether I want to do Flick Knives. So we'll go through the motions. I banish to Uzuri. He has priority.
Yep.
He's checking for Command and Conquer.
Sure. If
he finds all 3 CNC, then he doesn't have to D-React now.
Yep. And I think he does, yeah. You can see him stop at the exact second that he finds the 3rd CNC.
Yep.
So he knows he can let this resolve and then D-React after the fact.
Yeah, so he goes Tunic, Shunt from hand, blocking 7.
That's a blue Shunt, alright, yeah.
Yep, so...
And you do have a Shred here, actually.
I do have a Shred, and the only consideration is whether Flick Knives comes out on this chain link, or this reaction window. And I'm, again, just making doubly sure that it should not be used.
I think because you have the Shred here to make the Death Touch connect, I think you're fine not flicking. But
again, like I have not only the Nerve Scalpel but the Spider's Bite to consider. So it's really like, when is that final turn going to be?
Because you don't
happening.
You don't want to, have to play an extra turn just to flick because you brought it.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just don't have that last extra turn that you need, right?
Yes. Yep. So here the Shred hits his 3 block, and I force him into using another D-React. So this is excellent. This is like right where I want him.
Yep. And it was the correct choice not to flick, because it wouldn't have done anything in this spot.
Yep. So I move right into the turn. Kyle had no plays except for taking his Tunic.
Sure, like he just draws back up, right? Makes sense.
Yep. So here's where I know I might be flicking. I'll pause it. this whole game you see me attack first with Nerf Scalpel. Now I'm telegraphing that I'm going to do 2 dagger swings because I'm attacking first with Spider's Bite.
Yep.
So the reason to do this is if I want to flick knives and I don't flick the Nerf Scalpel, Spider's Bite has to be a prior chain link.
Yeah.
Can't be the current one. So it comes first.
Also, generally, if you want to attack with both daggers, you always want to lead with the one that has the least targets in the opponent's deck.
Yeah.
In general, right? So normally that would not be Spider's Bite, but in this specific matchup it is.
Yeah. And the reason for that is when you attack with the one that has the most targets, they can just put that target against the Spider's Bite, in this case, on the second attack.
So let's say you're up against a regular deck that runs a ton of attacks, and you attack with the Spider's Bite first. They can just block the second dagger with an attack action that blocks for 2 now, and then they can clean up, both daggers with 1 card, essentially. So that's why you don't want to do it like that.
So I have an Isolate, which, if my last card as a swap target represents lethal,
yes,
I think it might be a Death Touch. I'm flashing it there. No, it looks like another stealth card. Yeah, I think I saw a Red Infect.
I don't think you have another Death Touch in the deck at this point.
I think you're right.
Might be wrong, but I think you've used all 3 at this juncture. Okay,
so, but Kyle is gonna. Yep. Yeah. So look, if my last card has 6 power, then I can flick knives to win. So Kyle is saying, not only do I want your 6 power card to only hit me for 1, but I want to not be dead to 2 flick knives.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So that's why he's giving all his armor. So I just pass, given that he is sort of forced into this line if he thinks I'm on a 6
power. It makes sense, and you didn't even have the 6 power, right, in the first place.
Correct.
So you could have switched here just for 1 damage, and I think that might actually be worth it if you did have the 6, just to get 1 extra damage, get him to 2, right? Because 2 is basically lethal for him in this situation.
Right. So I want to point out, I actually don't have an arsenal right now.
Yep. You chose to not arsenal.
I chose to not arsenal. Yes. Yep. So the reason for this is I know that Codex is my win condition. Yeah. So I need my arsenal to be empty.
Makes sense.
It was indeed a Red Infect, I think. So I can't put that there if I'm going to win the game. Here's where if I had Snapdragon Scalers, it would have made a big difference. Mm-hmm. Because I could have kept that Red Infect in arsenal and, just done the snaps to really push it home. Kyle attacks because having a blue overpower in arsenal is pretty bad.
True.
And here we go. Last turn of the game.
You're at 1, he's at 4.
Yep.
So you start with the Nerf Scalpel.
Yeah. So this time it's Nerf Scalpel because I'm going to be attacking with both daggers, and I actually want the Nerf Scalpel effect to potentially be live before the chain link.
Makes sense.
He does not gain life from his fighting spirit, conveniently for me. So yeah, here we go. I'm gonna flick this thing.
Yep. Flick the Nerf Scalpel, he goes to 3.
So the reason to do this instead of waiting is there's a chance that cards in his hand aren't specifically D-react, but are actually attack react. So I want to make sure that I've got the debuff. So then play the Codex.
Codex, and you grab a CNC.
The CNC and the Death Touch actually do the same thing. Except the Death Touch has the Blood Run on hit. So just in case he has some weird stuff going.
Somehow clean up 5 points of value or something, so he stays at 2. The Death Touch actually gets a relevant on hit here.
Yeah. And I was just taking my time to make sure that was the right logic.
Yeah. Makes sense. Nice. And I think that was the last bit of gas you had left in the tank, right? If that Codex didn't kill him here, I think that's it for your deck, basically. You have no more threats left. Maybe there's 1 shred left or something. That's possible, but I think that was pretty much it for your deck. You really ran it down to the wire to actually get there, but you did get there. So,
and yeah, I mean, it was I think on offense I did just about everything I could, and I had to not only use every last card in my deck, but I had to think about the ways he was going to try to stop me from doing that. And it's just like there was a reason Nathan Crawford thought it was unwinnable for Uzuri. It's because it's like really hard to balance all that stuff.
It's hard. Like fatigue is
Yeah.
like, because you have to play such a different game compared to what you normally do. And the games naturally go very long, right? Obviously, because the opponent is just blocking, 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 trying to run you out of cards. It's just mentally very challenging and very fatiguing, actually, right? To play these kinds of games. And I think that it's something that you said to me, right, like a couple of days ago, where you went like, I kind of haven't had to play against fatigue for a while now, because there just hasn't been any deck in the game that really has fatigue as like their primary strategy, right? There's obviously a couple of decks that can do it, if the situation shakes out like that, Uzuri among them, right? You can totally fatigue somebody on Uzuri if the game, shakes out that way. But I don't think any prominent deck in the meta currently really does fatigue as their core strategy, right? Bravo can do it into some matchups for sure, but I don't think it's necessarily what they want to do, against the majority of decks from the start. It sometimes happens that they just have to fatigue, like against a Dash.io, for example, as a Bravo. You just go like, okay, I'm just gonna block a lot, and then I run them out of cards at some point because they have to boost. And then of course Tekla Vossen does that, right? That's like a primary fatigue deck basically, but almost nobody plays Tekla, so it's not really something you see a lot, right? And kind of the same goes for Arachne. And I kind of hesitate to call Arachne like it's definitely a fatigue deck, but they operate on a very different axis of fatigue, because you do all of this active fatiguing through the contracts, through banishing cards, right? And not necessarily the passive kind of Oldhim style of fatigue, where you just block a whole lot, you defend a whole lot, and then eventually your opponent just runs out of cards to actually kill you.
Right. And, I think we might be able to test something like this. We could optimize this Dorinthea deck for just like swinging that stupid axe. And
Yep.
and we could make sure Uzuri has like all the shreds, has, plenty of damage density in the deck. And I'd be interested to see who wins that kind of matchup.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing, because I think, like you said, the deck that Kyle ran was definitely not a hyper optimized Greataxe list, right? That was basically a Dawnblade list with the Greataxe and then a whole bunch of random cards thrown in just to, pad the deck size a bit. But in no way was that a deck that goes, okay, I'm going to try to squeeze every last bit of value out of this axe that I can get. It was more of okay, I'm not going to win this matchup with Dawnblade, so I need to try to find something I can do without, necessarily costing me a ton of deck space and a ton of sideboard cards.
Yeah. Well, I think what it accomplished very well is it just made all my defensive cards terrible. And that, had ripple effects with how well I could actually force damage through, especially those early turns. They were just pitiful, I couldn't do anything.
I mean, it kind of balances out, right? Because if you have a crap early game, that typically means you have a better late game. And the problem against like aggressive decks is if you don't live to see that late game, it kind of doesn't do anything. But against a deck like Decimator Dori, where you're going to see the late game because it's a fatigue deck, and they try to run you through the entire, cards in your deck. So you're going to see second cycle. You're most likely going to see third cycle even. So that means you naturally see all the cards in your deck, and then all of the lost efficiency on those early turns tends to not matter that much.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Pretty much. I think this game was like just a joy to play. It was fun to commentate over, but I don't think you're ever gonna see another one exactly like this again. It was a pretty unique circumstances that led to it.
That was definitely like product, I think, of the circumstances leading up to this, basically. But it was definitely a blast to watch it back on the weekend when it happened. It was definitely, in my opinion, one of the best games of the tournament. At least of the ones that were on camera, obviously, right? I don't know what happened at the actual tournament, so maybe there was some insane matches. I gotta say, it was definitely a lot more interesting than the finals game. Like, no disrespect to Kano, and it definitely takes a ton of work to be able to play that deck, but it is kind of not that interesting to watch somebody just win on turn one by just going, right, I drew the nuts, you're dead. GG. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just yeah.
I'm not gonna throw any Kano shade. I
No,
played a
no,
lot of
it's
Kano
not.
in my day. But what I will do is I did beat Mara in the Swiss in this event. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna I'm gonna throw, I'm gonna throw a challenge out there if she ends up watching.
All
Like,
right.
come on, next time, next tournament, you gotta show up more prepared.
Okay. That sounds pretty good because, like, I mean, if there's anybody that knows how to play Dromai, right, it's definitely Mara. But I think Ben's already shown in the video that we did, right, that even a Dromai piloted by Mara is not unbeatable if you're on Uzuri, right? It's definitely something you can do. So actually, I just want to hop back over to the deck list real quick
Sure.
because the way the finals game went, right, where you lost to Kano basically without ever getting to play the game. Do you think that anything you can change in the list drastically changes the outcome of that match?
Okay. Let's say you're worried about something happening to you as it did to me. First of all, maybe don't be as worried because you just got a PTI from it. Second, the
Fair.
the like, let's imagine I'm fully Tetracano, I have Arcane Barrier 3, I have 15 blues in my deck, I have Oasis Respite. There's still like a 50% chance I draw a hand that's exactly like what you saw. 4 reds,
Yeah.
no Oasis. And you die.
Yeah.
Same way. Like, you just die. I mean, if you want to warp your whole strategy just to die 15% less, that's fine.
No, like I think that checks out with what my thoughts of that matchup are. I remember like back, I don't know, that was when was that Road to Nationals, in was that in June or something? I don't remember, where I played Redline, where I brought Redline, right, and I decided to just completely sacrifice the Kano matchup. And that was
Yeah.
back in a meta where Icelander was still legal, by the way. It just was at a point in time where really nobody played her for some reason. Like, not a single person was an Icelander. And I remember that at the event, there were actually 2 people playing Kano. I was just pretty fortunate to not run into any of them because I was like 100% sure that Kano was a unwinnable matchup for this deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, that's still true. Like, you can get lucky, like you said, you can, run more blues, run AB3, run Oasis Respite, and maybe through some combination of you drawing the right sequence of cards and them just drawing absolute garbage all game, you can win that match. But I think for the most part, Kano is as close to an auto loss as it gets for Uzuri. And I personally, I think no matter how you construct your deck, that's not going to change. I just think that Uzuri is a deck that just has a fundamental lack of the correct tools to beat Kano in any kind of repeatable sort of fashion, right? Like, it can definitely happen. You can get lucky, or they can mess up their combo. It happens even to experienced Kano pilots, right? But I think if they know what to expect from your deck and they have a strategy prepared for that, they're gonna win like 9 times out of 10. And it doesn't really matter what cards you put in your deck.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kano is maybe one of the last heroes left of kind of the old design philosophy. Yeah. Obviously, there are others that were printed in that time, but Kano's use of action points is not anywhere near the way the modern game is going.
True.
So, like, for instance, if Kano had to kill you on his turn, Uzuri would actually be kind of decent because you can hit him with Humble, you can hit him with Command and Conquer, you can like turn off all these combo cards if they can only play on their turn. So yeah, it's that playing on our turn that we can't really interact with, which is unfortunate, but I think forces in the meta will probably make it so that Kano's not actually oppressive.
The thing is, like, he always loses to like very aggressive decks. That's kind of the nature of how it goes, unless he gets like stupid lucky and just, draws the nuts and then kills them on turn 1. That can obviously happen against like a Fi or whatever, but on average, right, any deck that can go like I can present lethal within like 3 to 4 turns is gonna be tough for Kano to overcome. And that's kind of the issue, because Uzuri just flat out can't do that. Like, you can cram a ton of generic go again in your deck, and I think we're at the point where you can't realistically put any more in, just because anything else you can add at this point is just really bad, or really inefficient rather. And yeah, so we're just a deck that fundamentally cannot kill Kano fast enough, and I guess we just have to live with that, Like, in an ideal world, we could play a deck that has a fair fighting chance against everything. And I think we're at the point where we can say we have that against everything but Kano. And I think that's not the worst spot to be in as a deck, personally.
No, it's a great spot to be in.
Yeah.
There, like, if ever there's more than 10% of a meta that's Kano,
yeah,
he will get stuffed down by the decks that try to beat him, because he is extremely easy to target. That's extremely easy.
Yeah. Yes, he is. Yeah, that's true. Like, Kano's never gonna be like the top meta deck in the way Icelander was. I don't think that's ever gonna happen, just because, like you said, it's too easy to either tech against him with a deck that can do so. Like, if I'm playing Levia, for example, and I want to play against Kano, it takes me like maybe 3 sideboard cards to do that. Right? Yeah. I just bring Grasp of Darkness, I bring Cloak of Darkness, and then Kano just cries, because I can present 12 plus damage every single turn, and he can't combo me because I can just say I have Spell Void 4 on the board, and there's nothing he can do about that. Or you just run a deck that flat out just kind of can, ignore Kano in the first place. Like, if you play Fi, you don't have to worry about Kano. It's just like, okay, I'm just going to kill this guy unless he gets really lucky with his draws, basically. So yeah, I don't think we ever have to worry about Kano being a relative large amount of the meta. I don't think that's going to happen. But I also think if you do run into a Kano at an event, you just kind of have to accept that you're most likely going to lose that game, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. And that just kind of, is not, it's not great to be in that position where you have to go, okay, if I run into this person, I just lose, but, it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. And most people take some losses at tournaments when they win the tournament anyway, right? It's very rare to not take any defeats. Like, we have game into everything else. So, if your loss is to Kano, fine, you still topped. Yep.
It's all right. You're doing good for yourself. Yeah, it's true. Okay. Any closing words from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a fatigue type warrior in your meta, there's definitely cards you can change from this list to make that better. You can have fewer D-reacts, you can have higher damage density, so more cards that have a big number in their bottom left corner. And yeah, just I would say practice. If this matchup is giving you trouble, you want to make sure you can recognize those play patterns quickly, because the games do take a while, so practice is important.
Yep. And or actually most of what we talked about today and what you just mentioned also applies if any other deck is trying to fatigue you, right? Like, if you have a Bravo locally that plays very fatigue heavy and tries to do this kind of strategy, the same things work against them. Like, it's literally the same thing. Fatigue decks all operate on the same axis, basically, apart from Arachne, right? That's a little bit different, but for the most part, the same strategies will work against these decks, because if all you're doing is blocking a lot, right, the text on your cards doesn't matter that much. You're only interested in this number. The rest of the card doesn't matter that much. All right. Okay. And I think that's a good way to close it out. Thank you guys for watching. The link to the deck that Tom used will be in the description of the video, like I mentioned. And if you've got any questions about this matchup or anything else, feel free to leave them in the comments or try to find us on Discord. We're both active on there, on the official FAB TCG Discord. So if you have any questions, just reach out, let us know. And have a good day. See you in the next one.
See ya.